live. Are they on? Somebody throw a big switch on it. Will be live on the Times Radio YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube, search Times Radio, and the cameras will be on. We'll bring you PMQs Unpacked. Hello from Sherwood Forest, says John Michael White. Mike is in Thailand. Hello from Greyish DeGamwe, Patricia says. Not live here yet in Kent, says Christine. Hi from sunny Taunton. Tell Tim I enjoyed All Out War on holiday, a cracking read. There we are. Lovely stuff. Lara Spirit, Times Red Box editor, is here, as is Tim Shipman, Sunday Times chief political commentator. Lara, what could we possibly be discussing at PMQs, do you think?
Well, the bombshell Rwanda ruling is almost certain to come up at some point. There are two signatories I've just seen. Those who are asking questions have just been released. Their names have just been released. So Desmond Swain is asking a question. He signed this notwithstanding amendment, as it's now being known, kind of part of the response that those on the right who are unhappy with this ruling have mounted, as has Ian Paisley. So whether or not they bring up anything today will be interesting to see. Other than that, nobody on that list who has tabled that amendment or will be expected to say anything disobliging about the Prime Minister today. But it's fair to say that those some of those on the backbenchers are absolutely furious about the ruling, and whether or not that finds its way into PMQs today, I think will be very interesting to see.
Striking, Tim, that in the immediate response, certainly Rishi Sunak's statement was very placatory. Yeah, we accept the ruling, we've been planning for all eventualities, we're going to look at it in detail, and then we'll come back. Whereas almost immediately you had Lee Anderson, vice chair of the Tory party, as appointed by Rishi Sunak, coming out and saying we should ignore the laws.
Yeah, well, I mean, governments in the end don't do that, even ones that had Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson in them. I mean, this ruling is interesting. It's accepted the principle that you can send people elsewhere, but just not to Rwanda. And frankly, anyone who listened to the ruling will wonder what really it's got to do with the European Court of Human Rights or the Convention, because frankly, the government haven't gone to the trouble of getting a legally binding deal. Rwanda had one of these deals, a memorandum of understanding with Israel, and they completely broke it. So it's not terribly surprising that the court has found against it. So there's sort of two things here. There's the principle of, is the convention getting in the way of practical policy making, which is a perfectly legitimate argument for the Tory right to adopt. But frankly, anyone listening to the ruling would think that there was just quite a lot of shoddy policy making going on that just hasn't really sort of ticked the boxes and put the belt and braces on the policy. And if they had done, they might well have won the case.
Do you mean that Suella Braverman, which was Home Secretary, didn't cross all the I's and dots all the T's? It's extraordinary.
My favourite tweet this morning was one that said, "Cleverly must resign," after one day in the job.
But it's not all fun and games over on the Labour side either, Lara, with this vote on, it's ostensibly on the King's Speech, but because you can put down anything in response to the King's Speech, there's this vote on a ceasefire.
This is an SNP amendment in which Keir Starmer is facing a very serious challenge, I think it's fair to say, to party unity. He has said, or it's understood, that his MPs won't be taking part in that amendment, but they have also said that they think, or it's understood that they think that anybody who votes on the front bench for that amendment backing a ceasefire, that's not compatible with them being on the front bench, and we are expecting them to be sacked if they go ahead with it. So a real test for Keir Starmer's authority. They will try and table another amendment that is pretty critical of what's happening so far, but it will stop short of calling for a ceasefire, which some of those on the front bench have already openly said that they want. So big moment for Keir Starmer later on. And
then chuck into the mix as well. Apparently some Tory MPs, or there's a row over whether or not Tory MPs can vote for an amendment to the King's Speech on wanting a ban on conversion therapy. So they might end up getting the sack. The stakes could not be higher. Get on live to the Times Radio YouTube channel. PMQs Unpacked is next.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
It's 12 o'clock. I'm Matt Chorley and this is Times Radio. In a moment, PMQs Unpacked, but first a reminder of the headlines this lunchtime. The government's policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda has been ruled unlawful by the Supreme Court. Judges decided there was too much risk of people being sent out to countries where they'd face persecution. The Home Secretary says it's just part of their plan to stop people crossing the English Channel in small boats. We'll obviously bring you the reaction and Rishi Sunak's opening statement to the House of Commons in just a moment. The Prime Minister, meanwhile, has said he's delivered on his promise to halve inflation, as it's now 4.6%, down from 10.5% at the beginning of this year. The cost of alcohol, transport and household services decreased or increased by less, leaves the overall inflation rate slowing down. The Israeli army says its forces are carrying out a precise and targeted operation against Hamas in the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza. Witnesses said they'd seen tanks in the hospital grounds and soldiers entering the emergency department and basement, where Israel claims Hamas has a command centre. Appeal judges have refused to give Olivia Pratt-Corbell's killer permission to challenge a 42-year minimum jail term. Thomas Cashman was found guilty of murdering the 9-year-old at her home in Liverpool in August 2022. And President Xi is in California to meet Joe Biden. The two leaders will discuss China-US relations and issues concerning world peace. That's according to China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman. There'll be a full news roundup in an hour. But now, live on Times Radio and on the YouTube channel, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
Yeah, here we are again. Then after a couple of weeks off for various reasons, although Tim Shipman very kindly turned up for PMQs last week, didn't you, Tim?
Thank you very much.
You came in,
yes.
sat down, ready to go, and then...
The fierce urgency of now coursing through my veins, only to be told, not now.
There's no PMQs.
Next week.
Well, anyway, you're here.
I am
You're
very much
very
here.
kindly. You, unlike Solibar, when you pitched up a tent and you stayed here for a whole week...
That would be it.
...to make sure you were here. There's only really one thing that's going to come up, isn't there?
Well, I would think, I mean, it's a slightly tricky balancing act for Keir Starmer, isn't it? Because he's going to have to tear the what's it out of the government's immigration policy as a result of the Rwanda ruling. But we've also got this reshuffle, which, let's be frank, gives some opportunity for comedic value. I've got slightly high hopes. I hope they're not dashed. That the Labour Party gagmeisters might have come up with something this week.
If you can't fashion something out of David Cameron's comeback, then frankly you've no business.
Well, there's that. There's Nigel Farage in the jungle. There's Sibylla Braverman.
Yeah,
you know, it's a bit like an episode of Spitting Image about to unfold before our eyes, I suspect.
Never mind. And in a quieter week, these might be bigger stories. The Environment Secretary's wife works for a water company. The Health Secretary's husband runs the biggest sugar company in the country. Plenty to go at.
And then Rishi Sunak, how many times is he going to mention inflation in his 6 answers? Are we going to get six goes at that, or just a couple?
In fact, to try and get ahead of all of that, Rishi said normally the Speaker calls the first question and the Prime Minister just says, I've had various meetings today, I shall have further such meetings later today. Occasionally, the Prime Minister likes to basically issue a little statement at the top. So in fact, we could bring you that now. This is Rishi Sunak answering a question before one's even been asked.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, at the start of this year, I made halving inflation my number one priority. Today, we have delivered on that commitment. There remains more to do, but this is a strong step forward. This morning, also, the Supreme Court gave a judgment on the Rwanda plan. They confirmed that the principle of removing asylum seekers to a safe third country is lawful. There are further elements that they want additional certainty on, and noted that changes can be delivered in the future to address those issues. The government has been working already on a new treaty with Rwanda, and we will finalise that in light of today's judgment. And furthermore, if necessary, I am prepared to revisit our domestic legal frameworks. Let me assure the House, my commitment to stopping the boats is unwavering. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be making an oral statement shortly to the House. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today. Yeah.
Well, there we are. You got inflation in before anything else. And why wouldn't you? You know, if you had these 5 targets, everyone said they were stupid and you'd never meet them. He's met one of them, albeit...
Well, it's quite a day for the 5 targets, isn't it? Because inflation met, boats struggling.
Yeah. Boats not quite stopped. In terms of the Rwanda question, he's willing to revisit our domestic legal framework. What does that mean in English?
Well, I mean, they can pass laws that make it clearer that, how you interpret some of the legislation and thoughts of the European Convention, as I understand it. The detail is sort of mind-numbing, but what people like Suella Braverman have been pushing for is kind of these notwithstanding clauses. I don't think he has to necessarily go down that route. He can find different ways of saying the court should interpret these conventions. She's kind of saying ignore it completely. But, it's an extra round of things, and it's something that would take a lot of time, and it doesn't then mean that there's going to be time for this to start having much of an effect before a general election. And that's what Suella Braverman's beef was in her resignation letter. It
wasn't a resignation letter?
Apologies. It was a post-sacking justificatory letter.
Very good.
And... yeah, she basically sort of said, look, I told you all this months ago, and we needed to get it in place, and you weren't interested, and now you're going to have to do it. It'd be interesting to see which of the specific paths he goes down, and I'm apologising to the listeners if my answer was not quite specific enough. but it is devilishly complicated. Basically, you can tell the courts to interpret things differently, or you can tell them to ignore things. It seems to me more likely that he's going to tell them to interpret things differently. But, we are in an interesting sort of political context here across the whole of Europe. You've got Europe talking about, offshore processing of migrants, and the fact, there's a good chance that Greece and Italy would consider leaving the European Convention as well, given that they're the ones being completely inundated with
because there's a problem right across Europe.
Yeah, there's a problem right across Europe, and there is a case here for some kind of understanding on how these things are dealt with on a wider basis than just what we get up to in Britain. But that isn't going to satisfy the Tory right conceptually or in the short term. And I think we're all waiting for Desmond Swayne to get to his feet.
Well, exactly. We'll come to. Let's not wish our lives away, Tim. We'll come to that in a minute. So there we are. Maybe we'll find out what revisiting our domestic legal framework means as Keir Starmer gets to his feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister obviously thinks so little of his own MPs that he's had to peel David Cameron away from his 7-year exile in a shepherd's hut and make him Foreign Secretary. But a few months ago, the Intelligence and Security Committee said that the now Foreign Secretary's role in a Chinese investment fund may have been, and this is their words, engineered by the Chinese state. I hardly need to remind the Prime Minister of the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party or the intimidation against members of this House. So when will he instruct the Foreign Secretary to give full public disclosure of his work for Chinese interests?
Mr. Speaker, as I said, I'm delighted that the former Prime Minister has rejoined government as Foreign Secretary. As an individual with unrivalled experience, he will help Britain navigate an uncertain world in challenging times. Of course, like every other government minister, he will go through the normal process with the independent advisor. But the government's position on China is clear. China represents an epoch-defining challenge. That's why we have taken strong and robust steps to protect ourselves against the risk that it poses. But we'll take no lessons, Mr. Speaker, from the Labour Party on protecting our national security. They've taken almost £700,000 from an alleged Chinese agent.
Wow.
This could turn into a bit of a rocks throwing in a greenhouse enterprise, couldn't it? So Barry Gardner, formerly of the Shadow Cabinet, took some money from someone who was suspected to be a Chinese spy. One waits for the retort from the leader of the opposition, who points out that the current security minister worked for a sort of counter-Chinese agency in Westminster, which also appears to have employed a Chinese spy who is currently under suspicion and has been helping the police with their inquiries. So this is an interesting area where both sides have problems.
For legal reasons, we should point out that Barry Gardner did not employ the alleged Chinese spy, and he said that, but he did take money. He only found out she was a spy, engaged in illegal activity when approached by security officials.
There we go.
Very good. So let's zoom back then. Interesting decision by Keir Starmer not to talk about inflation, which is fine because, it's a good news day for the Prime Minister, but not to go in on Rwanda, the big story of the day.
Yeah.
And instead, maybe because, it would essentially mean prepping two different sets of questions because you didn't know what was going to happen this morning. And they're actually going for the jugular on David Cameron. David Cameron's clearly got questions about his involvement with China. He was a very enthusiastic embracer of China when he was Prime Minister, and that seems to have continued since he left office.
That's right. And he's had links with sort of a company that's been doing business, I think, in Sri Lanka with Chinese backing. So, look, it's clear that he was appointed before the usual kind of procedures were completed. I suspect if he's got business interests, he'll be asked to divest himself of them, and that will become clear in due course. But the thing from Starmer's point of view is this is not just hearsay. This is something that the Intelligence and Security Committee has already drawn attention to, and is a concern of the kind of securocrats in Whitehall. And this, of course, will have a dynamic inside the Conservative Party as well. Because a lot of those right-wingers who were upset about what's going on with Rwanda and with the sacking of Suella Braverman are also people who are China hawks and don't like this. So David Cameron coming back offends them from a point of view of often being Brexiteers. It offends them because he's more pro-Chinese than they'd like the government to be, and it offends them because it's helped lead to the departure of one of their own. So it's... there's quite a lot going on that's antagonising that wing of the Conservative Party this week.
And it's just a sign of how far we've come in British politics that I was just looking at this, October 2015, so David Cameron, as Prime Minister, talked about a golden era in British-Chinese relationships.
Well, it was for about 6 weeks, wasn't it?
And then you've got the now Prime Minister, his now boss, calling China an epoch-defining challenge.
That's right.
But
I think there's been a lot of waking up in the West to... Look, China and Russia are slightly different. Russia is an overt security threat. China is in some ways, but it was perceived for a long time to be primarily a commercial threat, that it was about them stealing our intellectual property, nicking our ideas and making them cheaper and quicker and in greater numbers. It's now become clear that China, which for a very long time had quite an insular kind of approach to the world, it was more concerned with people not interfering with their internal affairs and didn't particularly project its power elsewhere. It has spent probably the better part of 2 decades projecting power around the world and having a lot of influence in developing countries. And I think it's taken quite a while for the sort of security and foreign policy establishments of Western countries to kind of wake up to that. Don't forget, they've been obsessed with sort of Islamist terrorism since 9/11. They've been obsessed with collapsing economic problems, from 2008 and again more recently. We've had COVID, we've had, China being a sort of existential kind of foreign policy challenge, I think without all of that would have been much more on the radar for the last 10 or 15 years. But it's becoming much clearer now in the battle for resources and the battle for growth and all the rest of it that they're something you have to reckon with.
Here we are. Somebody's just been in touch. To not jump on the Rwanda judgment was an astonishing lost opportunity for Starmer. Shows a disturbing lack of agility. Stunned of Clerkenwell. Well, let's see if...
Well, it is surprising, but it would only be surprising if we get through six questions without it. I mean, the other thing to consider, of course, is that there is a statement from the Home Secretary, and the story is kind of already there. Whatever Keir Starmer says about it, Keir Starmer's going to be the last 2 paragraphs after the judges have said it's a disaster.
So that might as well be about
and the Tory right have said, it's... up with this we will not put. If this is effectively, from a news management point of view, weapising a second story that's bad news for the government.
He's got a separate story in the
I
paper,
can see why he
news,
might want to do that.
Right, here we go then. It's taken 15 minutes to do one question. Let's go back to the House of Commons. This is question 2 from Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker,
It's not... Sorry?
Lindsay
yes,
Hoyle's
I
up.
think, no, you're on the front bench. We need to just calm down. Keir Starmer.
Is that Richard Holden?
Mr. Speaker, for someone who spent the last few weeks complaining about recycling bins, it's ironic that his latest reset involves recycling the architects of 13 years of Tory failure. But this is the Prime Minister who also reanimated the career of the member for Fareham in order to resuscitate his own just days after she was sacked for a national security breach.
When he brought it back as
Is he ashamed that he was so desperate to become Tory leader, so scared to face a vote, that he put someone so totally unfit for office in charge of Britain's national security?
Mr. Speaker, he mentions 13 years. We remember what happened at the beginning of that 13 years. It was this party that restored this country's financial security after the Labour Party left no money behind, Mr. Speaker. And it is a bit rich to take lectures on security from a man who wanted to make the former member for Islington North Prime Minister of our country.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I mean, that was the easiest comeback in the history of the world, wasn't it?
Although
I mean, literally the language that Starmer was using, totally unfit for office and fears about, security. I mean, literally, that is what the security services would have told you about Jeremy Corbyn.
He is still the member for Islington North as well. He's not the former member. He's still there.
But interesting, Starmer trying to compare, Cameron and Braverman and sort of say they're both a security risk, and you employed one of them and now you've employed the other. Look, there's obviously sort of something that David Cameron needs to answer questions about, but making out that they're all kind of
one in the same
is interesting.
But I mean, in terms of political strategy, Rishi Sunak now really leaning into it has all been really good the last 13 years. The Tory party conference speech, where the last 30 years have been a total disaster. Actually, the last 13 years of Conservative government, as started by his new Foreign Secretary when he was Prime Minister, all fine.
Well, and the other thing that was strange about the conference speech was we kind of figured that Sunak was going to run against former Tories. We just didn't figure he was going to run against David Cameron and George Osborne. We assumed he was going to run against Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. Now, Cameron's appointment means that it's now possible again. I think Danny Finkelstein wrote about this yesterday, that it's entirely possible that this opens up space for him to start having a pop at Truss and Johnson in a more meaningful way. But it's certainly not consistent. And this is a guy who's been slightly perplexingly pitching himself as the change candidate. Bringing back the bloke who started it all is not the way to go about that either.
As Matt asks on the YouTube channel, has Sunak given up on being the change candidate? Well, I don't know. Maybe he'll change again. Let's go back to the comments. This is question 3 from Keir Starmer.
The member for Islington North isn't even a Labour MP anymore.
Jeremy
a change party and strong leadership. Mr. Speaker.
Luke, with a lot of business today, very important business with some important votes, and I want to get through this speedily. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, for 13 years our security has been undermined by this Tory government. And now the most ridiculous, pathetic spectacle of all. His Rwanda scheme, cooked up with his National Security Threat Home Secretary, has blown up. He was told over and over again that this would happen, that it wouldn't work, and it was just the latest Tory gimmick. But he bet everything on it, and now he's totally exposed. The central pillar of his government has crumbled beneath him. Does he want to apologise to the country for wasting £140 million of taxpayer cash and wasting his entire time in office?
Mr. Speaker, obviously the person officer didn't hear what I said about our approach to Rwanda, and not least when it comes to stopping the boats. Rwanda is one part of our plan which has already delivered a reduction in the number of small boats this year by a third, Mr. Speaker. But he talks about apologising. He talks about the former member not being a Labour MP now. Yes, he wasn't a Labour MP when he declined 15 different times to say that Hamas was a terrorist organisation this week, which is shameful. But he was a Labour MP. Indeed, the honourable gentleman served with him. He told the country he would make a great Prime Minister. At that point, he described Hamas as friends. Does he want to apologise for that now?
It's a thin ice approach, this, isn't it? I mean, so Jeremy Corbyn, the point he was talking about there was Jeremy Corbyn went on Piers Morgan's show this week, and Piers Morgan asked him 15 times to call Hamas a terror organisation.
Well, I mean, he doesn't think they are.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And we kind of know that. And, go back to the phrasing of what, how Starmer phrased the previous question about, was he so desperate to become Tory leader that he was prepared to install Suella Braverman? Well, you can equally well say of Starmer that he was so desperate to become Labour leader that he pretended to the Corbynites he was on their side and then dumped all his pledges. And, I think this is reasonably effective mudslinging from Sunak. It's not, we might be sort of weary of this meme, but
it works.
It's legitimate in one sense, and B, my understanding is they do think it works to a degree. So, it's robust politics, and it's interesting that Starmer's taken this approach because it was always going to lay him, they would have known it would lay him open to this attack. And he looked pretty peeved on the front bench there when the cameras cut to him. He didn't look like he was terribly happy about it, and he can't have been terribly surprised.
Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
We should point out that sitting either side of Rishi Sunak is Oliver Dowden and his new who's obviously the Deputy Prime Minister, and his new Home Secretary, James Cleverly. And
I would say Cleverly's nod is a sort of sage, slow nod in the Braverman role, rather than that of a sort of one of the Churchill dogs in the back of a car going, oh yes, as the head goes up and down.
Which is the Braverman issue we had before. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. If you want to see what they look like on the front page, get online to the Times Radio YouTube channel, where lots of people are arguing about how who's being more desperate, basically, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Go back to the comments then. Question 4 from Keir Starmer.
Are we serious?
Oh, actually, no. It's intervention number 3
because
from
I'm going to tell
Lindsay
I
Hall.
won't challenge. Because I've got to say, our constituents are watching this. They're very, very concerned about the affairs of today. They're very concerned about the votes later. A lot of members wish to speak. Those who don't want that to happen, please, go outside, go and have a conversation there. You want to bawl and shout, do it elsewhere. But it won't be happening in here today. Keir Starmer.
That's all aimed
Mr.
at
Speaker,
Tory
I'm so glad he
MPs.
agrees this is a changed Labour Party. And while he was wasting his time on this gimmick, the asylum backlog has swollen to 175,000 people. Taxpayers are paying £8 million a day on hotel bills, and 615 people arrived by small boat last Sunday alone. Plan A has failed. And after this session, whether he likes it or not, he'll have to go back to his office, back to the drawing board, and start from scratch. Can he assure the British public that he will drop what his former Home Secretary calls his magical thinking and start treating small boat crossings with the seriousness that they deserve?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about a changed Labour Party. Perhaps we'll see that this evening. He can't even make his party do the right thing when it comes to standing by Israel in the vote later today. He talks about taking small boats crossing seriously. He's opposed every single measure that we have taken, Mr. Speaker. Again, let me update him on what we've done this year. The number of illegal Albania arrivals down by 90%. 20,000 people returned this year. The number of crossings down by a third. He mentioned hotels, closing 50 of them. Money being saved for taxpayers. All, by the way, opposed by the party opposite. What is the honourable gentleman's plan? Yes, there we have it. A cosy deal with the EU, which would see the UK accept 100,000 illegal migrants. He doesn't want to stop the boats. He wants to welcome more of them.
I don't totally know how Keir Starmer's managing to blunder into so many bear traps.
No. I mean, this is...
The Labour Party...
It wasn't quite an open goal, but it was certainly an opportunity to rack up the score today. And, we're on to question... We've had 4 questions, and if it's better than 2-2 for Starmer, I'd be surprised, to be honest.
The gags on the reshuffle weren't very good, which is what we're looking forward to. Actually, framing the whole thing through David Cameron's legacy might have been better. But instead... he's now being duffed up over Jeremy Corbyn, which, like it or not, and some people getting in touch saying they don't care, but, it clearly works. And then, bluntly, the Labour Party don't have a plan for dealing with the small boats either.
Well, I mean, they have put forward the idea that you need to clear the backlog and that, you could do some kind of arrangement with the EU. But the second they said what that might look like, the Tories pointed out it was 100,000 more people, and then they said that wasn't their plan at all. And I think... people who care about this will smell that really there isn't a lot there. And again, Sunak is right to say everything they've done has been opposed. Now, that doesn't mean what the government has been doing is necessarily sensible or effective, and in some regards it's neither. But they have reduced the numbers, and Starmer at the moment doesn't have a particularly convincing story to tell on this. But I'm with you. The whole structure of this has been slightly curious. And you can open with the reshuffle stuff if you've got a series of genuine belly gags, or use that as the way into everything else.
Or you could use Suella Braverman to drive a wedge between the Prime Minister and his MPs, which, that can be done but effectively by Leader of the Opposition.
Well, once more, I'm left to conclude that, you and I might be quite good at this. Yeah. Imagine.
Let's go back to the House of Commons and see if it gets any better. This is Keir Starmer, question 5.
Mr. Speaker, it's very straightforward. He promised that he would stop the boats this year. Yeah. This year. Today is the 15th of November. He's wasted all of his time on a gimmick, and now he's absolutely nowhere. Will he level with the British public and finally admit he's failed to deliver on his promise?
Mr. Speaker, this government has done more to tackle illegal migration than any in the past. And again, let's just review, Mr. Speaker. He's been on the wrong side of this issue his entire career. This is a man who described all immigration law as racist. He said it was a mistake to control immigration, and he has never once in this place voted for stricter asylum rules. It's clear, Mr. Speaker, while he might want to listen to the open border activists, I'm siding with the British people.
Oh, dear. I mean, of all the weeks you'd have thought you could have duffed up the Prime Minister. I mean, potentially this week might end up being both simultaneously his best and worst week as Prime Minister. Well, if your question is, will you level with the British public that you failed to deliver on his promise, what do you think he's going to say?
No, I know. It's a total non-question. A bit like the previous one, where he was effectively saying, he's got to go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. Well, he'd already laid out his plan B even before the PMQs started. So there's not been a lot of sort of tap dancing and responding to...
Excuse me. So that was an enormous sneeze on my part.
So shocked by Starmer's performance that we've
I've developed an allergy to it.
Expectorate some air. This is... look, I make this point, with crushing and boring regularity on this programme, but, half of what matters about PMQs is a headline, and the other half is what do your troops leave the chamber with their dander up or their sulk on? And Tory MPs, I suspect, will be in the dander game after this. They'll be pretty happy with how Sunak has punched back on this. And I think the counter-punches, frankly, have been rather harder than the initial jabs.
And actually, at a time when Keir Starmer's got his own... Keir Starmer needs to gee up his own troops, given the tensions and divisions over supporting a ceasefire in Gaza. This doesn't feel like a thing which is geeing him up. Lots of you now getting in touch. Fair play to Sunak. Starmer's been rubbish. This should have been an easy win today. Can he really be an effective PM? Let us know what you think. Post your comments on the YouTube channel. Text me 87222. Start your message with the word Times. Let's see if it improves at all in the final exchange. This is question 6 from Keir Starmer.
I would have thought if he was confident about his promise, he would have given an answer saying he stands by it and will deliver by the end of the year. Yeah. But the absence of that answer is absolutely amazing in the circumstances. He's had 3 reshuffles, a forgotten conference speech, an empty King speech. Yeah. He even found time to fanboy Elon Musk. But not one of them has made the slightest difference to the lives of working people. If we had £1 for every time we had a reset, the cost of living crisis would be over long ago. Now, he likes to think of himself as the man from Silicon Valley, the tech-savvy Californian, the country's first AI PM. And yet his big idea is to keep turning his government on and off and hope at the wall and hope that we'll see signs of life. Is he starting to feel that, as somebody once said, he was the future once?
I slightly missed the end of that, but I've got to say, I was glad to hear finally that the honourable gentleman did bring up the cost of living, because on that he is right. That is the number one challenge facing countries up and down the family. And today, he mentioned it, but what he failed to recognise, and he talked about delivering on promises, today was a day that we delivered on the most important pledge I make to halve inflation, Mr. Speaker. Delivering on a commitment, easing the burden for families up and down the country. What we would see from the party opposite is everything would jeopardise that progress, borrowing £28 billion a year, undermining our energy security, giving in to inflation-busting pay rises to his union backers. That's not a sensible plan, Mr. Speaker. It would push up mortgage rates, push up inflation, harm working families. All the while, we're going to continue delivering for the country.
Look, I think in that answer, Rishi Sunak has a far better general election pitch than he showed us at conference. Yeah. He talked about change and all that. I don't think that works. Danny Finkelstein's famous 3 ways you can win an election. One of them is things are beginning to get better. Don't let the other lot ruin it. Yep. That's basically what you just heard from Sunak. So that's a sort of coherent position. Before that, we heard a sort of pretty... Look, there's been an interesting theme which we haven't talked about in some of Starmer's stuff, where he talks about you've wasted time and it's all gimmicks. Yeah. He's done that 2, if not 3 times during this. That could work for him. Some of the examples he gave, perfectly reasonable, reshuffles, forgotten conference speech, fanboying with Elon Musk. The AI gag was destroyed by him stumbling over his words and... in the fashion that Margaret Thatcher used to do when she didn't really understand the joke that she was reading out, and that was pretty dire.
I thought that about a lot of it, talking about fanboying Elon. I'm not sure fanboying is a verb that Keir Starmer would normally use.
And then, switching it on and off at the wall. I mean, it's an okay joke, but it was poorly delivered, didn't work.
And it was a fortnight ago.
And then Sunak, God bless him, delivered us the highlight of the whole session for me when he talked about countries up and down the family. And we realised immediately what he said and just ploughed merrily on, and then said families up and down the country again a bit later. But that was the highlight. Look, I mean... I've had a message from a Tory MP who is not someone who is normally drowning in goodwill for the Prime Minister. Labour bench is much sadder than ours. Starmer was woeful, and that's someone who's not hugely supportive of Sunak normally. Amazingly, I think he won that.
I know, which you would not have thought coming into this. More than just getting through it, he's actually... if there are wavering Tory MPs on the back benches, he might have just tilted them back towards his side today.
Well, those that are sort of open to him. I mean, he's probably got more enemies this week on his back benches than he had last week, but he may have more supporters as well. As I say, if what we heard at the end is what he's now going to pitch as his central argument, I think he's finally sort of arrived at the one thing that might stop the bleeding and potentially give them, some hope of getting close. Because I think most of what he's done between July and now has been sort of bizarre, to be honest.
Ollie says, I've cut short revision for a work exam this afternoon for this. What a waste. Sorry about that, Ollie. Ollie's watching on YouTube. You can do the same. Lara Spirit will be here next with the best of the rest. Just go online to YouTube, search on the Times, search Times Radio, hit subscribe and all that, and then you can see us as we pause the action. Will any of the other backbench questions be any better than Keir Starmer's? We'll find out next.
Politics without the boring bits. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Purina Adventuros are delicious dog treats in a variety of wild flavours and irresistibly chewy textures, ideal for dogs with a nose for adventure. Sunday Times travel writer Yvette Caster has some great ideas about where your next adventure with your best friend could be.
Dog ownership has boomed during lockdown, and there's been a 47% rise in pet-friendly bookings on Airbnb year on year. A place that I absolutely love is the Cotswolds. It's about 800 square miles of dazzling, quintessentially English countryside. There's really beautiful villages, gorgeous greenery, and a multitude of hiking opportunities. The Cotswolds is a beautiful place to retreat to at any time of the year, and your dog will adore exploring its parks, woods, rivers and villages. It's incredibly important to take holidays, even if it's just a weekend away. For adventurous dogs, there are huge well-being benefits. After all, whether on 2 legs or 4, we all need a break and a change of scene.
Times Radio with Purina Adventuros dog treats. Discover new wild adventures every day with Adventuros.
Download the latest episode of Off Air with Jane Garvey and Fee Glover. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
On digital radio, on the web, and via the Times Radio app. Matt Chorley on Times Radio.
Very good afternoon to you. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio, bringing you PMQs Unpacked with Lara Spirit, Times Red Box editor, and Tim Shipman, chief political commentator of the Sunday Times. So, Lara Spirit, you were watching the best of the rest. Overall, how was it?
It was very interesting today, actually.
Unusually so.
No, it really was. And I just listened to you both talking about how Sunak might have clinched it. I think he did struggle a lot with some of these questions.
Oh, that's good. Let's find out then. So, well, no, I mean, to be honest, we basically agreed that Keir Starmer flunked what should have been a sort of great moment for him. So, who are we going to first?
So we are, interestingly, going to Neil O'Brien first, who until a few days ago was, of course, a junior health minister. I was told earlier that he had been in attendance at a new Conservative meeting that had gone on just after the Rwanda ruling to plot next steps among those who are unhappy with it. And he asked a very forthright question here on the government's next steps.
Mr. Speaker, last year through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, my family and I welcomed a refugee family to our home. And I'm proud that this country has always offered refuge to those who need it. But it's essential that we in this country decide who comes to this country. The Prime Minister has rightly said that he will do whatever it takes to stop the small boats and the evil trade around them. But isn't it apparent that after this morning's ruling, what it will take is a new law to override the Human Rights Act and to cut through the thicket of case law built up by judicial activism so that we can bring back control of our borders and stop the small boats?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we go through the judgment carefully and properly. And as I said, the government has already been working in advance on a new treaty with Rwanda to address the concerns that have been raised, that were raised previously and that were raised by the Supreme Court, who also acknowledge that changes can be delivered to address those issues. But as I said, and I'll repeat, if it becomes clear that our domestic legal frameworks, or indeed international conventions, are still frustrating plans after that point, I am prepared to change our laws and revisit those international relationships, because we are absolutely committed to stopping the boats.
John Butler.
So this is a sign of the... And Neil O'Brien is not a sort of lunatic, head-banging, right-winger as opponents might normally characterise him.
Exactly, no. He's involved, I think, still with the Onward think tank, which is, of course, centre-right think tank. It's not necessarily easy to put him in one box on this, for example, and it's not necessarily surprising. But I do think it speaks to concern that Rishi Sunak's team will have that people across the party are unhappy with the Rwanda ruling, that is not going to be contained to the kind of biggest Suella Braverman loyalists. I think this is a problem that will go beyond them.
I mean, Neil O'Brien is big pals with Will Tanner, who's the Deputy Chief of Staff in Number 10, who himself, as I understand it, thinks that they may need to withdraw from the convention. Liam Booth-Smith, the Chief of Staff, thinks it might be necessary. Nick Timothy, who's been advising them and is now a candidate, he thinks it's necessary. So O'Brien is kind of very much not one of the kind of outward headbangers on this. He's someone who has been working very closely with people right at the top of government. I thought Sunak's answer was interesting there, because he didn't in PMQs, but he did there talk about international conventions as well as the domestic law. So that made that slightly more explicit than it had been in the answers he gave earlier. Very good.
We're keeping an eye on James Cleverly's making a statement to the Commons, setting out the government a bit more detail of the Rwanda ruling. Not that many Tory MPs, as we said, from you can see in the Commons. Let's carry on with the best of the rest for now, Lara. Where are we going next?
We're going to Greg Smith, the Conservative MP, looking ahead to next week's autumn statement and this vexed question of tax thresholds. Of course, this idea that many more people are being drawn into higher rates of tax, and a big question from those such as Sir Jake Berry, who have called this tax pledge to try and make sure there are no tax rises next week. Now, thresholds, I think, are a key thing to watch, and listen to Greg Smith for why.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The inflation numbers this morning were very welcome, but the tax burden continues to bite. So will the Prime Minister agree in principle with me that the concept of higher rate tax was never meant to drag in police sergeants, Band 8 nurses, teachers with additional responsibilities and others, and that a priority for his Treasury ministers should be to return fairness to the tax thresholds.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable gentleman, and I'm pleased that the vast majority of people will continue not to pay the higher rate. I share his ambition to cut taxes for working people. Right now, inflation is falling, and we're sticking to our plan, which is delivering a halving of it this year, because that is the most effective tax cut that we could have delivered for the British people this year, rather than making it worse, as the party opposite would, borrowing money in the way that would be irresponsible and just drive up inflation and interest rates. But I want to reassure him that I absolutely share his ambition to cut taxes for working people, and as we stabilise the economy, that's something that both the Chancellor and I are keen to deliver.
JB.
I mean, this is the other thing. It's not just Rwanda. The pressure from Tory MPs for next week, when we keep reading that there's headroom, 15 billion here, 13 billion there for Jeremy Hunt. And like it or not, they're going to want, if not next week, to go into an election saying they're going to do something about that.
Yeah, I think this so-called fiscal drag is a big thing. It's estimated to raise the Treasury, I think, 25 billion a year by 27-28, which is when it's been extended to. But it's sort of one of these quiet stealth tax rises that raises the Treasury a huge amount of money, but is actually vastly unpopular with Conservative MPs.
It's very unpopular with MPs, but it makes very little difference to the public. Yes, it makes a difference in their pay packets, but you look at all the polling, people want headline tax cuts. They want to pay
because it's
one less p in the pound of their money.
Yeah.
But threshold. This is one of the most bizarre things of the last 20 years.
This is the idea.
MPs obsess about thresholds.
There's a level when you start paying the 40p rate, and each year, if you get a pay rise in line with inflation, and obviously we've seen this week actually pay rises going up a bit higher than inflation, but if that goes up by 5, everyone gets a pay rise in line with inflation, but a big load of that then tips you over the edge, and then you end up being caught by the.
But you only pay the 40% on the extra bit.
You're still better off. You still have more money at the end of the month, even after you've paid your tax. And because there's a reason why ministers like it, because it's stealth and it doesn't.
Exactly, it raises loads of money and it doesn't annoy the public nearly as much as it annoys Tory MPs. And if you come in with a, whack, the basic rate down to 19p, you'll get a disproportionate amount of political credit for that, even though fiddling about with thresholds is far more significant.
Tim is wrong. Thresholds do matter, says
Well,
Ross.
of course they matter, but it's they don't matter as much as Tory MPs think they do. You look at all the polling, people follow the headline rates.
Yeah. One more.
This is a quick one. It's from Kevin Brennan and the Labour MP, and it is about the new Foreign Secretary.
He just said he had unprecedented experience. What would he say was David Cameron's finest foreign policy achievement?
Mr. Speaker, I think there's Mr. Speaker, in fact, the many to pick from. But what I would say is under his leadership, this country hosted what was widely considered to be one of the most successful G8 summits of recent time.
Blimey.
G8 summit.
Well, they got a very nice table out of it, didn't they? This was all at Lochern in...
yes, I was.
And they got a lovely round wooden table, which is still upstairs in Downing Street to this day. Oh. And it was well organised, and they managed to achieve things at the time. Don't ask me what they were.
Very important.
But yeah, it's tricky to talk about his European policy, tricky to talk about his Libya policy, tricky to talk about his China policy. So at least we got a nice lump of oak.
Even his relationship with America, given he got Barack Obama to stick his neck out on Brexit, and that didn't work.
Well, yeah, and also managed to annoy Obama no end by failing to pass in the Commons plan to go and airstrike the Syrians over chemical weapons after Ed Miliband did the dirty on him. So, yeah, it's one of the areas where, if he'd been talking about schools policy or welfare reform, he might have had the leg to stand on there. But
which is why
it's not notable that David Cameron was a successful foreign policy Prime Minister.
Well, there we are. We'll end on that cheerful note. A smart question from Kevin Brennan.
Very smart. And Kevin Brennan's one of those classic sort of
somebody
smart,
can do it. Somebody can do it on the Labour benches.
Backbenchers who knows how to ask.
Tim Shipman, lovely to see. Chief of Commentators of the Sunday Times, Tim Shipman. Lara Spirit, Times Red Box Editor. What time will you be in people's inboxes?
3 p.m.
3 p.m. Time. Subscribers go to thetimes.co.uk/redbox and subscribe right now. PMQs Unpacked will be back same time next week, but not with me. Tim, will you be here next week?
Yeah,
Tim will be here. Patrick Maguire will be here. Lovely. Right, just to bring you an update now from the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, outlining a bit more detail on his response to that Supreme Court ruling on Rwanda.
We anticipated this judgment as a possible result, and for the last few months have been working on a plan to provide the certainty that the court demands. We have been working with Rwanda to build capacity and amend agreements with Rwanda to make clear that those sent there cannot be sent to another country than the UK. Our intention is to uphold our agreement, to upgrade our agreement to a treaty as soon as possible. That will make it absolutely clear to our courts and to Strasbourg that the risks laid out by the court today have been responded to, will be consistent with international law, and ensure that Parliament is able to scrutinise it.
James Cleverly there, the Home Secretary, setting out the government's response to the ruling by the Supreme Court that its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful, talking about upgrading the treaty with Rwanda. And as we heard from Rishi Sunak at the beginning of PMQs, looking at revisiting the domestic legal framework. Plenty more reaction to that throughout the day here on Times Radio, of course. And we will bring you details of Rishi Sunak's press conference. I think 4:45 Downing Street saying that's going to happen. That will be with Jane Garvey and Fee Glover. They're here from 3 o'clock. And then John Pienaar here with Times Radio Drive, rounding it all up